I got nightmares in my head, I fear thoughts build up until I can't hear. That my mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear the thoughts build up until I can't hear. That my mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. Is there really a defense case for Lucy Letby? I guess another way of asking that is a defense case for Lucy Letby realistic? And we're going to really try to address that question and answer it in this analysis. In this analysis, we're going to examine the defense case, but we're going to do it via Lucia de Berk, basically a Dutch version of Lucy, also a nurse, also accused of similar charges 20 years ago, also convicted of 7 murders as well as several attempted murders. In April 2010, Lucia's case was retried and she was exonerated. Is that what we'd like to see happen here? Before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. Welcome to the thousands of you who have subscribed. I do want to take a step back and start, because I think there are a lot of you who maybe come from perhaps the nursing or the medical sort of industry or background like that, and you may be unfamiliar with true crime or perhaps not interested in true crime, and perhaps unfamiliar with this channel and unfamiliar with how the methodology. So you might be very familiar with what you do in hospitals, but are you familiar with the systems and tried and tested statistics and methodologies used in true crime, certainly by myself and certain other people? So maybe it's good to look at the tools in the toolbox. And so for a few days, I'm thinking of doing a little departure from the regular programming on this channel and looking at the pillars of when you investigate a case, the sort of 4 pillars of the true crime table: identity, timeline, dynamics, and context. You're not seeing it in a fragmented way, you're seeing it within a process and within various aspects that are part of that process, and then governing all of this, how all of this combines, aggravates, comes together in some form of social death. And social death is the table itself. If you're enjoying this analysis, please like, share, leave a comment. You can also hit the thanks button. By the way, I'm not seeing too many thanks from the folks in the UK. I see dollar signs. I don't really see pound signs. Does that mean that my UK following don't really approve of my analysis? Anyway, if you do approve, please hit the thanks button and let's get started. As a result of an unexpected death of a baby in the Juliana Kinderzienhuis, JKZ, or Juliana's Children's Hospital, that's in The Hague or Den Haag in the Netherlands on 4 September 2001, earlier deaths and cardiopulmonary resuscitations were scrutinized. Between September 2000 and September 2001, there appeared to have been 9 incidents which had been thought unremarkable but later became considered medically suspicious. De Berk had been on duty at the time of those incidents and responsible for patient care and delivery of medication. The hospital decided to press charges against De Berk. So we have a similar timeline of a string of incidents. Instead of from June 2015 to June 2016, now it's September 2000 to September 2001. And so it lasts for roughly a year, and it's a similar number of incidents over a similar period. On the 24th of March 2003, this is according to the Wikipedia article, De Berk was sentenced by the court in The Hague to life imprisonment for the murder of 4 patients and the attempted murder of 3 others. So again, a similar sentence. Life in prison. Okay. The verdict depended in part on a statistical calculation according to which the probability was allegedly only only 1 in 342 million that a nurse's shifts would coincide with so many of the deaths and resuscitations purely by chance. However, de Berk was sentenced only for the cases in which, according to a medical expert, either other evidence was present or no natural causes could explain the incident. In other words, that statistical correlation would have been even higher if Lucia was associated with deaths under her watch where evidence was lacking. In her appeal on 18 June 2004, de Berk's conviction for the 7 murders and 3 attempted murders was upheld. So she's found guilty, appeals it, and it's upheld. The crimes were supposed to have taken place in 3 hospitals in The Hague: the Juliana Child Hospital, JKZ, the Red Cross Hospital, RKZ, and the Leyenburg Hospital, where de Berk had worked earlier. Now, there are at least 2 ways to interpret this. Firstly, that Lucy might have committed crimes elsewhere. I think that's the obvious way. But secondly, also, based on our profiling knowledge, 75% of female serial killers target victims only at a single location. And this may indicate that the data around Lucia de Berk could be wrong. In 2 cases, the court concluded that there was proof that de Berk had poisoned the patients. Concerning the other cases, the judges considered that they could not be explained medically, but must have been caused by de Berk, who was present on all of these occasions. Now, we know with Lucy that there are relatively fewer. The minority of the incidents involve insulin poisoning, right? And the majority involves something else. In this case, the poisoning makes up the majority of cases. The idea that only weaker evidence was needed for these subsequent murders after 2 had been proven beyond reasonable doubt was dubbed chain link proof by the prosecution and adopted by the court. And I think there's a kind of chain link proof thing that took place in the Laurie Vallow case, where there was not a lot of evidence in terms of what happened to Tylee Ryan, but there was a sort of a chain link that made that make sense, that it was another crime committed for the same reasons. At de Berk's 2004 trial, besides a life sentence, she also received detention with coerced psychiatric treatment, but the State Criminal Psychological Observation Unit found no evidence of mental illness. Now, I always find it incredibly ironic. When someone commits a crime, especially a serious crime, they have to be mentally ill. And this is such a popular myth. The defendants invariably try to make the same claims themselves. In trying to defend themselves, like Laurie Vallow did and Letitia Stork recently did, they try and say that they are incompetent, that they can't tell right from wrong, that they've got some kind of mental illness. This fallacy is built on the myth that no one in their right mind could do this, and further, we are nothing like these people, which is why labeling them puts them into a nice, neat box with a bow around it, and then we feel better about ourselves and the world. Anyway, going back to that Wikipedia article, of the 7 murders and 3 attempted murders that were finally attributed to de Berk by the court, it considered 2 of them to be proven by medical evidence. According to the court, de Berk had poisoned both patients. The court then applied a so-called chaining evidence argument. If several attempted or actual murders had already been established beyond reasonable doubt, then much weaker than normal evidence was considered by the court to be sufficient in establishing that 8 subsequent suspicious incidents were actual or attempted murders that had been carried out by the same defendant. Now, the way I understand this case, and perhaps I don't understand it very well, is that you had this chain link evidence basically saying, because you've got quite strong evidence in this case and that case, well, then that basically makes our argument for all the other cases. And then the defense argument, the way that she eventually got off, was to apply it in the reverse direction, to say, we don't have any evidence in all of these cases, let's say 5, 6 cases, whatever it is. And so let's use that in a kind of a chain link fashion to show that the evidence, the supposed evidence in the 2 murders aren't actually don't actually hold up to scrutiny. So it seems to me you had the same chain link argument operating in reverse and then successfully. That seemed to be their strategy. So for the 2 murders that were found to be proven by the court in The Hague, many experts did not exclude a natural cause of death. For the case in which digoxin poisoning was alleged and supposedly detected by independent measurements in 2 Dutch laboratories, the method used in those laboratories did not exclude that the substance had actually been a related substance that is naturally produced in the human body. The Strasbourg laboratory used a new method, a test of high specificity and sensitivity, which did not support the digoxin overdose hypothesis. So they found a lab somewhere that basically found a different alternative. In the second case, the intoxication could have been an overdose caused by a faulty prescription. So in other words, they're saying someone did this, but maybe it wasn't deliberate. For both children, it was not clear how and when de Berk could have administered the poison. Now, I don't know how you could show that. Unless you have CCTV in the ward, how are you going to be able to prove exactly when this happened? Regarding the digoxin case, the prosecution gave a detailed reconstruction of the timing. However, other parts of the evidence that were discarded by the prosecution had showed by the timestamp on a certain monitor that at the alleged moment of poisoning, de Berk was not with the patient at all, and that the specialist and his assistant were then with the patient. And this reminds me a little bit of the Brian Koberger argument. If the prosecution say that he was at a certain point at an exact point in time, all he's got to do is disprove that, and then he throws water over their whole case. It's much harder to prove that without knowing than to disprove it when you do know what your movements were. The prosecution initially charged de Berk of causing 13 deaths or medical emergencies. In court, the defense showed definitively that de Berk could not have been involved at all in several of the cases. So basically saying that in some of the cases that she was found guilty of, she couldn't have been involved. And so, as I say, using that chain link then to say, well, then she wasn't involved in any of this. For instance, there was a case where she'd been away for several days, and the idea that she was there had been caused by administrative errors. Furthermore, all deaths had been registered as natural except for the last event. Even that one had initially been thought to be death by natural causes. So what they're basically saying is, the original assessment was that these babies died naturally. But isn't that what you would naturally think? Your first thought wouldn't be when a baby dies in a situation like that, or somebody dies in a situation like that, that it is murder. That shouldn't be your first thought. Even that one that had originally been thought to be death by natural causes by the doctors responsible for the child, but within a day it had become connected by other hospital authorities with de Berk and her repeated presence at recent incidents and classified as an unnatural death. So what you have here, I don't know the details back to front, but you have an unusual number of deaths attributed to a Dutch female nurse, and we also know that half of female serial killers do work in medical environments, and suddenly all the deaths are successfully argued to be natural. In Lucy's case, she left behind post-its. In Lucia's case, she left behind a diary. Quite an interesting intertextuality. De Berk's diary also played a role in her conviction. On the day of the death of one of her patients, an elderly lady in a terminal stage of cancer, she wrote that she had given into her compulsion. Those words should be highlighted. She wrote she gave into her compulsion on the day that one patient died. She wrote on another occasion that she had a very great secret and that she was concerned about her tendency to give in to her compulsion. It's quite interesting here. Something that I've suggested as well is that what Lucy was doing was something like an addiction, something that she gave into. something that was like fantasy or a temptation that she had to resist. De Berk stated that they were references to a passion for reading tarot cards. So giving into a compulsion, a very great secret, a tendency to give into a compulsion was about this passion for reading tarot cards. She explained that she did this secretly because she did not believe it to be appropriate to the clinical setting of a hospital. But the court decided the references were evidence that she had euthanized the patients. According to the court, the reading of the cards did not accord with a compulsion or perhaps an expression of fatigue, as her diary had described at the time. Meanwhile, de Berk's daughter, Fabienne, stated in an interview on the television program Poe and Vitamin that some of her mother's notes in the diaries were pure fiction, which she intended to use in writing a thriller. So daughter was saying her mother's writing a book, and that's where these statements came from. The appeal hearing ended on 17 March 2010. Witnesses heard on the final day stated that the deaths at the Juliana Children's Hospital were natural and were sometimes caused by wrong treatment or bad hospital management, or sometimes unexpected because of faulty medical diagnosis. This is where you have a very kind of subtle difference. What's the difference, and how can you prove the difference between a nurse sabotaging, cynically, doing something in a deliberate way with intention, and another nurse right beside her doing something by accident? How can you prove that? How do you show that? How do you demonstrate that? They also said that the behavior of the nurses, including de Berk, during a couple of medical crises turned out to have been swift and effective and to have saved lives on several occasions. So it seems because Lucia had performed effectively in certain instances, basically did her job, because she'd actually saved lives here and there, which you'd expect a nurse to do occasionally, it didn't make any sense that she would deliberately kill. Do you agree with that argument? It's a nurse's job to save and assist patients. If Lucia never saved a single patient, never assisted a single patient, I think it would have been patently obvious that that was the case very early on. It's like suggesting if Rex Heuermann slept with a prostitute and didn't kill every single one, well, then he couldn't have killed anyone. Anyway, the public prosecution capitulated by formally requesting the court to deliver a not guilty verdict. And that happened on 14 April 2010. So it basically took 7 years to undo the original prosecution's case. And so by 2030, is Lucy Letby going to be a free woman? What do you think? I'm not going to take it further than that, certainly not in this episode. But I will be sharing my opinion in the next episode. I'd also really be interested in some of the questions you may have, whatever position you have. I might do a special live episode, your best and worst questions answered. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.